So we're now ready to begin Chapter 5, which is all about tissues. And so our job in this chapter is to understand first what a tissue is, and then to look at the 4 different types of tissues that we see in the human body, and then the subgroups within each of those 4 different tissue types. So let's begin. There are trillions and trillions, something like 75 trillion cells in the body, but only about 260 different kinds of cells. So if we have, almost 100 trillion cells in the body, we could sort those 100 trillion or so cells into 260 different buckets. And then we could take those buckets and start clustering them into about 25 different kinds of tissues. A tissue is a layer or a cluster of cells that are closely associated, so they're usually connected to each other. And they're cells that have a similar structure, and because they have similar structure, well, they have similar functions as well. And so all these cells work together to perform a common function in the body. Histology is the field of biology that is all about understanding tissues and how they work and how they're classified, what their functions are. So if we have those 25 groups of tissue types, we could further cluster them into 4 primary tissue types. And these are the primary tissue types. There's epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues. And so our job in this chapter is to look at the commonalities of all the epithelial tissues and then look at the differences, and the same with connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. And we'll introduce these 2 groups, the muscles and the nerves, but we're going to spend a lot more time later in this semester really getting into those. Where this chapter mostly focuses is trying to understand epithelial and connective tissues. So, but before we can get into that, we need to look a little bit about how it is that we get this close association. And so that's our next topic, is how is it that tissue cells stay in close association? And they're bound together by 3 different types of means. The first is with glue. And so glycoproteins, and if you unpack that word a little bit, glyco, that means carbohydrate or sugars. Proteins, well, we know what proteins are a little bit. So this is a molecule that's built partly of a saccharide or a sugar and partly of a protein. And it has a gluey effect. And so the cell membranes can be glued together by these adhesive glycoproteins that help to hold 2 membranes together. The cell membrane may also be highly folded. So we might have one cell that has this kind of folding and another cell that comes and matches right in there. And so the surfaces of the cells may be so interlocked, sort of like puzzle pieces, that the cells are held together. And then finally, cells may be held together by what are called intercellular junctions. So between cells, that's what intercellular means. And junctions, that's just hookups between 2 different cells. So these are special molecules that are associated with the cell membrane that connect 2 adjacent cell membranes together. So there are tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions. 3 different kind of intercellular junctions. So let's take a look at the first one, the tight junction. Tight junctions form when proteins that are found in adjacent, right next to each other, plasma membranes fuse together. So here's the protein. These blue things are the proteins. And a protein in this membrane will fuse with a protein that's found embedded in this membrane. And so where they fuse together, then nothing can get around it. So tight junctions are found in belts or in bands that wrap around, that bind 2 cells together. And they hold the cell membranes, these protein molecules, hold the cell membranes so close that extracellular fluid has a difficult time getting between them. So this is almost a watertight and molecule-tight junction here. And that's why they're tight junctions, because they hold it so tightly. And so one example of where we find tight junctions is in the epithelial cells that line the digestive tract. They hold together the cells of the digestive tract so tightly that the enzymes that might be, say, in the stomach up here on this side can't seep through and get to the tissues underneath. So that means of getting through is blocked by all of these proteins. So those are the tight junctions. They're found in belts or bands that kind of wrap and hold two cells together. The next kind of intercellular junction is a desmosome. Now, this is not a picture from your book, and so it's a little complex, but I'm going to just simplify it here a little bit. Here's the cell membrane of one cell, here's the cell membrane of another cell. So with a desmosome, the two membranes are not necessarily held tightly together. They are held together by these proteins that extend out from one cell membrane and that extend out from the other cell membrane. So here we have these proteins extending out, and where they latch together, they hold the cell together. It's almost like interlacing your fingers. There's still space for fluid, for extracellular fluid, and all the molecules that are in the extracellular fluid. They can slip around these desmosome connections because the cell membranes are not held tightly together. Now, on the inside of the cell, these filaments extend into the cytoplasm and even interconnect with some of the cytoskeletal elements inside the cytoplasm. So that makes a really strong connection inside the cell. And then they're held tightly together by these proteins that stick through the cell membrane and attach to each other. Excuse me. So these desmosomes allow the cells to twist and stretch and be compressed around each other. And so we find these in places where there's going to be a whole lot of mechanical stress to the cells, and where they might be stretched or pulled or ripped or so on. And so it's almost like, again, lacing your fingers together, and you get this. If you lace your two fingers from each hand together, and then you have your arms sticking out, those would be like these proteins that stick out from the cell membrane. And so that's flexible, you can bend it, but it's hard to pull them apart from each other. And so we find them in places where there's a lot of mechanical stress, stretching and twisting and ripping, like your skin. So in the epithelial layers of the skin, we see desmosomes between the cells, and at the cervix, the uterus, which has to withstand a lot of stretching during childbirth. The last kind of intercellular junction are the gap junctions. These are connections that both hold together the two membranes. So you can see the proteins that build the gap junction. There's usually 6 of them. They extend all the way through the cell membrane, and they fuse with the protein sticking through a second cell membrane. But they also have a little channel here that allows ions to move between the two cells. So this allows sugar molecules, ions, and other small molecules to make it from inside this cell here, through this little gap, through this little channel, and then into the other cell. So here's the cytoplasm of the second cell. So where we see gap junctions, one great place is in the heart. So gap junctions in the heart allow the muscle cells to communicate, the interior of the muscle cells in the heart muscle, to communicate with each other so that ions can pass quickly between the cells, causing the first muscle cell to contract, so this cell would contract, and the ions pass through, and that stimulates a contraction right next door. And these happen super quickly, and they allow the heart muscle to synchronize its contraction. All right, so we've seen that there are 3 different ways that we connect cell together. First with that glycoprotein glue adhesive, with also with, oh shoot, now I can't remember. Let's go back quickly. when the plasma membranes fold together. And then finally with the three different kinds of intercellular junctions: the tight junctions, the flexible desmosomes, and these gap junctions that allow for synchrony among the heart muscle cells. All right, good job. We'll see you in the next video.